How do you start a coding project? Do you start with OpenAI? Do you start with Claude? Do you start with Vertex? I'm old school. I kind of like to start with like a diagram. I like to draw like a relational database, maybe a flow diagram between different entities. That's really useful for me in understanding and planning my code. It turns out for AI, it's the same way. Today, we're going to be talking about a way you can use multimodal RAG to inject your diagrams into AI models so that they can write better code. Let's get into it in this episode of RAG Masters.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to RAG Masters, a show about retrieval-augmented generation. I'm Neil Katz, a 20-year tech entrepreneur. With me as co-pilot, as always, a human co-pilot, I should add, Daniel Warfield, a computer scientist, a data scientist, a RAG engineer, and importantly for our show, an educator on how to do all those things really well. What's up, Daniel? How are you?
I'm doing fantastically, and I'm very excited about this one because I feel like we really need to get to that next level of AI agent. Code assistance is like it's here, everyone's using it, but like we want it to like work. We don't want to have to explain every nitty gritty thing. Oh, I forgot to give it this function. Oh, I forgot to give it this definition. Oh my God. And then you just have to write this long thing in order to get this tiny block of code that you wanted to save 5 minutes to write.
So
I'm trying to deal with that.
I'm excited to jump in and hear you describe all of those things, but I just want to ask you, where are you zooming in from? It looks like you're like in Liberace's bathroom.
Oh, I'm in the same studio. I actually built this.
This is the new studio you're building.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like
oh boy.
Yeah,
I guess this is gonna be every week.
My landlord's gonna be pissed. But no, I don't know. We'll see. I'm still playing.
Candelabra.
Yeah. I need like a door and I can sneak out and like find a like Beauty and the Beast style.
You need a white tiger in there or something. I don't know. There's a lot of little Vegas over there. Anyway, that aside, we can leave aside the weird background you've created. Let's get into the code today. Talk about actually something pretty innovative, I think, because the latest hotness obviously is using AI IDEs, basically using these new AI environments to write better code, to write faster code. But I think, as you said in the intro, there's a lot of things that not AI engineers, but engineers have done for a long time to plan their projects really well, database schemas, flowcharts, and so forth. And in this episode, you're going to show us how we can use multimodal RAG to bring those old school elements into new school projects and supercharge your AI coding and make it even faster, better, and more complete. I think that's really cool. So
yeah.
Let's go to the videotape. I'm going to load up our screen right now, and let's jump into it. I think you're going to show us here. By the way, today we're going to be doing this with iLevel's GroundX APIs for enterprise grade RAG. And what we'll be looking at right now is, first of all, our ability to do multimodal ingest and turn images into LLM ready data for highly accurate RAG, especially on complex documents. We're also going to be looking at some of GroundX's tools that you have in the dashboard that allow you to do instant evaluation, allow you to see exactly what our vision model does to your documents and how it turns it into LLM-ready data. We've trained a vision model on 1 million pages of documents, many unlike the ones you're about to see. We could even custom fine-tune this ingest model. It's kind of a unique approach to how to do RAG. But the important thing is for today, we're not just going to see how we can break down complex documents, which you're going to take us inside, but how these tools, like an X-ray or an instant chat, help you do like rapid evaluation of, did this document come in correctly? Is this right? And can our RAG answer questions about this content? You can do all that in seconds instead of a long eval, process, which is important. But this is like front of the project eval. So with that wind up, why don't you show us what you've got? You've got some pretty complex documents, but they're not uncommon for engineering projects. Take us inside what you have and how it can be useful.
Yeah, so imagine you have a new project. Maybe you're starting a new project or you're hopping into a new code base. Yeah. And that code base has maybe some documentation. Maybe you have flow diagrams of how different entities relate to each other in terms of function calling. Maybe you have an entity relationship diagram that goes into defining a schema for like a relational database, right?
Yep.
Wouldn't it be really cool if you could like use these documents somehow to supplement your AI model so that it could like make intelligent coding decisions when you ask it questions? That's the whole idea. So
Yeah.
like what we did was we took these documents and we uploaded them to GroundX. And one of the things GroundX does is it uses a whole very complicated and cool, you don't have to worry about it, parsing system where it looks at your documents, it understands your documents, and it breaks it into LLM ready data, as Neil mentioned. So if we go to this UML sequence, which is this guy, we can, so I uploaded these already and we can click X-ray. That kind of allows us to look at the way the parser is understanding this document. And we can click this chunk, which is basically the entire diagram. And we can see that the diagram has been broken up into several formats. We have like a JSON format, a narrative text, something called suggested text. The whole idea here is we're taking this diagram and representing it as text. So this diagram has different components. There's a customer, there's a search form, there's search results, there's item database, there's a result list. And these entities have different relationships with one another, right? Mm-hmm. And what what GroundX does is it essentially looks at this diagram and breaks it into this large representation with all sorts of relationships. And it does it in many ways. One is a JSON representation, but I think for this one, the narrative is really cool. So it tries to break things up into like a JSON representation. That's really good for things like tables and maybe graphs. But for here, the narrative representation is great. So here, the parser is looking at this and describing it as a narrative. So the diagram represents, this sort of thing, whatever. It starts.
Well, you don't have to skip right over it. I think it's good to read it out because it explains what's happening, right? This diagram.
Yeah.
Sequence of
Sorry, I was trying to get to like the true beginning. So the diagram represents a sequence of operations from searching an item in a database. The process begins, that's where I was trying to get to. The process begins with the customer initiating a search by calling item search item name. So the customer calls item search item name on the search form, right? And then if that is valid by calling valid search, then that leads us to leading us to the item database by calling search items item name. After upon a successful retrieval, results is listed. And then display results is then called. If it's invalid, so down here, we call display error, right? And this is incredibly useful because now we have this diagram that a human would use to reason about how maybe things should be implemented, where things should go, et cetera, et cetera. And we have it in a textual representation that a language model can now understand.
Yeah.
Which is super cool. I kind of want to go into another one because the other one is we can actually get it to like generate some like code immediately and kind of show how this context can be used to bake in to generate code. Do you want to move to the next one? Do you have any ideas on this guy before we shift?
Well, unless you feel like there's a question you'd like to ask this particular object that you think, because we can also do instant chat here and just ask something of this. If you think there's something interesting to ask it.
I mean, for sure, right? So I'm trying to think. The other one, there's a bunch of questions that immediately come out to me, but we can look at all of the documents here and we can call it chat, right? So imagine we have all of our documentation for all of our code in this bucket, and then we can ask a question like, what function, like maybe I don't know where this diagram is, right? And I want to say what function is called when I search the form and it's invalid. And then what's happening here is it's calling basically our RAG system. It's retrieving that text that we just described earlier. It's injecting it into the language model. And then now the language model has that information. It can say, oh yeah, display error is called when you say that the search was invalid, which is true, right? So that's super cool.
Yeah, it's great. Look, it takes, the way you build a big project is you plan, right? You start with the planning phase and you sort of figure out what you want to build. And this really allows you to bring this now into this AI coding flow, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I think for the next one, I think it's like particularly cool, right?
Yeah,
Like this is a fairly common diagram, but here's an even more common diagram, which is an entity relationship diagram. When you're starting any project, essentially, like you end up building this ends up being the schema. It's the schema for your database. And then once you kind of build that schema, a lot of your applications end up coming from this relationship diagram of the high-level entities that exist within your system, right? So understanding this is super freaking important, right? But it's hard to understand. It's hard for a lot of parsers or language models or multimodal models to be able to understand this type of information because it's very dense. We have all this textual information. We have these, arrows. This arrow points to this guy and this guy. It can all get very confusing for a lot of AI systems. But what's cool about GroundX is it handles it pretty elegantly, which we can see here. So if we click on X-ray and then we check out, this guy, and we go to the JSON representation, we can see that there's these components, which you got the product, order details, orders, et cetera, et cetera. So we have all of these different tables that exist within this database. And then we have relationships between them. So products is related to order details. Order details is related to orders, et cetera, et cetera. And it represents this data in a lot of ways. We represent the products again, and then we show that the product ID is the primary key. And these are the attributes.
Right.
We have order details. You kind of get the idea, right? So we re-represent this complex spatial visual thing into JSON that a language model can understand. So here's kind of the upshot. So you drew this diagram that all of your engineers are using to make code and decide on how to work together. And you want to use AI without needing to say, okay, so I have this entity and they relate to another. Wouldn't it be cool if you can say, hey, make me
hey first.
Yeah. What's up, dude? Make me an SQL query, which shows all the products a customer has ordered by product ID. Okay, so fantastic. So what's going on here? So we're selecting the products that are bought by a customer ID. And the way we're actually getting that information is, we're starting with the customer's database, and there's a little.
Yeah, it made a little funny formatting error this time.
Yeah, interesting. We ran this before. It didn't do that. This
again was of course. Ask it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. Actually, and you know what? Well, let's ask it the same exact question.
Yeah, it seems to end that this time.
This is live television, everybody. It's the true. It's real life. So let's ignore that for a second. There might be something going wrong with like the little chat window we got going on. This would be the language model doing it, and I think it's very unlikely that GPT-4 is messing up basic SQL syntax. So let's just kind of ignore that for a second and go into the actual relationships that are happening, right? What's happening here is it's selecting all of the customers and the products IDs. And the way it's doing it is it's joining the orders on the customer. It's joining the order details on the order, and it's joining the product on the product ID of the order details. Oh, this is OD, this is C, this is O. So it's abbreviating these as O and C. Gotcha. So it came up with some funny names. So maybe you would want to in your prompting scheme, you might want to give it a little bit of information.
Tell the nomenclature you prefer.
Yeah, exactly. But as you can see, the upshot, the important part here is it understood the relationship between these entities, and it properly made an SQL query that joined them effectively to answer the question without me needing to write it out, right? So you can imagine if you have a ton of different flow diagrams, a ton of different processes, and you have them, you properly contextualize them so it knows what the names of things are. Yeah. Then you can kind of have it whip up very specific code based on your actual use case and your documentation, which is like kind of a dream, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many use cases here because, I think a lot of the AI coding projects just assume that you're starting from scratch. And that's not really how most coding projects start, right? You're working off a base, you're working off of some, prior code base, you're trying to create the next generation of what you're doing. There's usually documentation that describes the software that you already have that you now have to do something new with. And we've seen this allows that to be, integrated now into the AI flow. The other thing that strikes me is that we've seen a lot of people talk about front end work, how to like take a snapshot of a Figma page of like if someone's made what the front end should look like, and then feeding that into a multimodal model and that helping to generate some front end code from a picture. And that is pretty cool. But this kind of takes that and flips it on its head, says, hey, what if we take the back end and take the documentation there and use that to help generate code, or at least guide us on how we want to think about the project. I think that's really a cool like inversion of what everyone's doing right now.
Yeah, and it's cool because if you think of these different textual relationships as modalities, right? So you think of this JSON representation. It's all text, right? But if you imagine with me for a second that we have this new JSON modality and we have this new narrative modality, right? So it's a different way of describing the same stuff, but it has an implicitly different nature to it. I feel like a while ago, people were thinking front end stuff, we can do it. We have the figure, we have diffusion models, we can just, whatever. But these complex relationships, there's no way that AI can possibly help me code and navigate through this, complex array of combinations and different functions and how they call each other. It's just too complicated. I can only have it work on small stuff. I think when you start thinking about these different textual modalities, I think a lot of agentic people are also playing around with tree sitter. So if you're interested in that, that's super cool. It's like the way IEDs parse text. They use that to kind of hack into the underlying nature of the code. Really cool. But when you have these different modalities of text, different representations, this JSON, this narrative, and then these other sort of complex querying systems, these relationships start to feel way more approachable and way more accessible. Like I think people were like, we can get something to whip up like HTML and CSS, no problem. But getting it to understand these relationships, there's no way. I feel like as we move to these more complex sort of quasi-textual modalities, it starts to feel way more approachable, which is really freaking cool.
I love it, man. I think what you did here is really, really innovative. It's just really interesting. It's just like a different spin on how to bring together some like various fields people are working on. A lot of folks are working on multimodal AI. That's really cool. Some folks are obviously working on, AI or agentic driven coding. That's also really cool. Smushing them together in a new way. I got to hand it to you. Pretty interesting. I like what you did.
Rock on, rock on. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope you guys liked it too. Neil, they got to do something, right?
What do they got to do? They got to like and subscribe, which I'm supposed to say that at the front. I always say that back. I'm going to figure out this YouTube thing. Maybe in 20, 30 years, I'll get it right. I think we're on like episode 20. Figure this out by now. Not quite yet. Anyway, everyone like and subscribe. I don't think we actually have code to share in this case because we're kind of showing you basically how to use a tool. There's not real code here, but you can go to ilevel.ai. That's EYE level.ai. Create a free account. First 5 million tokens are free. You can do exactly what we just did, and tell us how you go. Tell us how the results are. If something didn't work, let us know. We'd love to hear about it. And if something went amazingly well, tell us that too. We'd love to hear it. All right, that's it for this week on RAG Masters. Next week, I think we're talking about something really, really big for us, RAG On-Prem, and we're unbelievably excited to be able to launch RAG On-Prem to let you do enterprise-grade RAG on your premises, even air-gapped, for the most secure launch RAG in the most secure data centers in the world, and we're super stoked about that. So that's coming next week. For now, see you guys in a little bit. Thanks you, Daniel. Great to see you.